So last week, for those of you who weren't here, I did some videos about 3 years ago on some of these fundamentals, and really what we're doing is just kind of working through those. Last week, we did some videos on the existence of the ether. It's a concept which has not been taught in Western science probably since about 100 years ago. And it was in the it was in the scientific realm for thousands of years before that. You always have to question why, and we went through some of that. But part and parcel with the ether is the a subject for today's topic, which is the existence of torsion fields and torsion waves. So I've got two other videos that I did that I'll replay today, and the first one's going to be about Nikolai Kozyrev. Kozyrev is really the father of torsion physics, and he lived in the Soviet Union during the middle part of the 20th century. We'll go into some of this background in the video, but Stalin imprisoned him for about 12 years. And during that time, he didn't have a whole lot more to do than to kind of contemplate nature. And a lot of what he discovered initially came from watching just plants and animals grow and things like that. And he, was able, after he got out, to subsequently test these with devices and so forth. So what he's going to prove to us is that this field, this torsion field, exists, and in fact, he will show and demonstrate that his theory is that our very existence is predicated on continuous movement, and so he equates time with movement in his theories. The second person we're going to talk about is Anatoly Akimov. He was probably a protege of, so to speak, time-wise. He came about 20 to 30 years after Kozyrev, but specific to the research on the pyramids, he did classic research on the effect of pyramids and cones. And a cone can really be considered as just a pyramid with an infinite number of sides. So it's not like it's totally different because the concepts are the same. But he shows that those objects, pyramids or cones that contain the golden section or phi in their geometry, are the most effective. His term is passive torsion generators, which means concentrators of etheric energy. So that's what we're going to do today. And at the end or between sessions, if you have questions, just write them in or raise your hand, and we'll try to answer them at the end of each video. So here we go. Can you see my screen? Yep, good.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay,
Yep.
Cool. All right, then we'll get started. Good morning, this is Charlie with Only PVC Pyramids. Today's video is entitled Nikolai Kozyrev's Research into Torsion Fields, Phi Spirals, and Time. This is part 4 of our Fundamentals of Pyramid Research series. And today we're going to be doing first a brief review of parts 1 and 3, where we discuss the existence of the ether. Then we're going to do an introduction to Dr. Kozyrev, discuss his observations of Phi spirals in nature and his theories of time and its relationship to movement. And then we're going to go through 4 experiments, classic experiments in torsion field research from Dr. Kozyrev. One that demonstrates that simple movement creates torsion waves. The second one, that weight increases and decreases can be caused by simple movement. C, that effects of density on energy absorption and release. And finally, that energy absorbed and released is done so in spurts, and in other words, that the energy absorption and release is quantized. So to begin with, let's review this research on the ether that we discussed in parts 1 through 3. In part 1, we discussed John Keely, Wilhelm Reich, and Victor Schauberger. John Keely developed a water-powered motor and explored and built anti-gravity devices in the 19th century. Wilhelm Reich built the orgone generator and also proved the value of orgone energy in health. Victor Schauberger developed vortex water machines and spiraling water machines that could actually cut through steel, and was ultimately forced to build anti-gravity machines for Hitler during the Third Reich. In part 3, we discussed Hal Puthoff, and he demonstrated that there's a seething cauldron of energy in the ether, even when the experiments were performed in a perfect vacuum inside a Faraday cage and at a temperature of absolute 0. Harold Aspen demonstrated that gyroscope experiments prove that the ether is like a pitcher of water, and once it's stirred up, it only slowly returns to rest. And finally, the research of Bruce De Palma, who showed that steel balls catapulted into a vacuum with the same force and angle rise to different heights and travel different distances depending upon their spin. The research information that we're going to use today is coming from chapter 1 of David Wilcox's book, The Divine Cosmos, which is available as a free book on his website, divinecosmos.com. Here's a picture of Nikolai Kozyrev, probably one of the best kept secrets in the scientific world in the West in the 20th century. Before we begin his work on torsion fields, I wanted to give us a definition of torsion so that we all understand what it means. This comes from dictionary.com. Torsion is a noun which describes the action of twisting and the state of being twisted. And in mechanics, the twisting of a body by two equal and opposite torques and the internal torque so produced. Nikolai Kozyrev is largely unknown in the West, as I mentioned. So I wanted to start with some biographical and research information before we begin. Kozyrev's first scientific paper was published at the age of 17, and other scientists were amazed by the depth and clarity of his logic. His main work was in astrophysics, where he studied the atmospheres of the sun and other stars, the phenomenon of solar eclipses and radiation equilibrium. By age of 20, he had already graduated from the University of Leningrad with a degree in physics and mathematics, and by age 28, he was widely known as a distinguished astronomer who taught at several colleges. His abundant life took a most unfortunate and difficult turn in 1936, when he was arrested under the repressive laws of Joseph Stalin, and in 1937, he began 11 years in a concentration camp. Although he did not have access to scientific equipment during his incarceration, he was given the most brutal of initiation experiences into hidden knowledge. He knew that in the mid-1800s, Louis Pasteur discovered that the building block of life, known as protoplasm, is inherently not symmetrical, and the colonies of microbes grow in a spiral structure. These expanding proportions, as shown in the diagram below, also underlie the structure of plants, insects, animals, and people. And as so many inheritors of the ancient tradition of the Atlantean mysteries have written, when discussing sacred geometries such as the spiraling form known as the Fibonacci golden mean and or phi spiral. From his observations in the prison camp, Kozyrev considered that all life forms might be drawing off of an unseen spiraling source of energy, in addition to their normal properties of gaining energy through eating, drinking, breathing, and photosynthesis. With respect to time, the spiraling energy patterns in nature unveil themselves to Dr. Kozyrev, as we mentioned, while he was in the concentration camp. His direct knowledge informed him that the spiraling energy was in fact a true nature and manifestation of time. Obviously, he felt that time as we now know it is much more than just a simple function for counting duration. Kozyrev urged those to think of a cause for time, something tangible and identifiable in the universe that we can associate with time. And after pondering this idea for a while, we see that time is ultimately nothing but a pure spiraling movement. We know that we are tracing a complex spiraling pattern through space, thanks to the orbital patterns of the Earth and the solar system. And now the study of temporology, or the study of time, is under continual active investigation by Moscow State University and the Russian Humanitarian Foundation, inspired by Dr. Kozyrev's work. On their website, they state that it is our understanding the nature of time is the mechanism that brings about appearing changes and occurring newness in the world. To understand the nature of time is to point to a process, a phenomenon, a carrier in the material world whose properties could be identified and corresponded with those of time. This may seem strange at first glance, since a tree falling in the yard could be seen as a product of a strong wind, not the flow of time. However, you must then ask yourself what caused the wind to blow, and ultimately the motion of the earth is what caused it. Now we're going to move on. We're going to discuss these concepts of time in further aspects of this, parts of the series. But now let's move on to some of the simple experiments that prove the basis of torsion waves and torsion physics. The first one, simple movement creates torsion waves. Some of Kozyrev's experiments seemed almost deceptively simple, considering the effects that he was able to achieve. For example, the simple raising and lowering of a 10-kilogram weight would exert torsional pressure on a pendulum at a distance of 2 to 3 meters away, an effect which would even travel through walls. The pendulum was shielded in glass under a vacuum, so this effect could not have been caused by the air. Moving on to the next experiment, weight increases and decreases caused by simple movement. In another experiment, Kozyrev had a typical beam balance used for weight measurements, where the right side had a fixed weight and the left side had a hook for suspending various objects. In this case, the objects Kozyrev hung from the left side were just simple weights, only they were attached to rubber strips that allowed them to be easily mounted onto the balance. Normally, with the weights on either side in a stable position, the beam would stay balanced at a certain weight that could be measured on the scale. Kozyrev would then stabilize the arm of the beam balance and remove the object on the left from its hook. Then he would shake the object up or down on the piece of rubber for about a minute, and that's all it took. After doing this, when he placed the object back on the balance arm with perfect stillness, he would again measure its weight, which would always be slightly higher than before. Then the scales would show the measured weight of the object gradually decreasing as it released the energy that it had taken in. So what we see here, we've seen two experiments so far. One, the simple movement of another object at a distance would cause a pendulum to begin to move inside of a vacuum. And now we see that the simple movement of an object itself is increasing the weight of that object, and that object, once it's once again stabilized, loses energy back into its environment. I just want to stop here so everybody can grasp what that experiment really says. I mean, all that Kozyrev was doing was, let's say he had an object on a rubber band like this, and all he did was shake it up and down, and he was able to determine that the weight of the object, just from shaking it, got bigger. That's so contrary to the way that we, approach the universe. So it's obvious from this experiment that an object picks up mass just through motion, and then it will give it up again. And that's what he's going to talk about here in a second. But that when I first read about this, it took me months to really start to grasp the significance of that. The third experiment had to do with what are called latent forces existing after energy stops being generated. And here the word latent often means left over, and Kozyrev observed certain effects that continued for a time after he stopped creating any torsion waves and or disturbance of the measured objects. We remember that Kozyrev demonstrated how the simple shaking of a weight on a rubber strip caused the weight to increase, and then it would slowly drop back down to its normal resting mass once it was placed back on the balance beam. The time that the objects took to return to their normal weight is how we measure the latent force that is capable of holding. Certain objects will gain and lose weight faster than others in Kozyrev's experiments. Kozyrev concluded that the rate at which an object gains or loses weight is actually based on its density or thickness and not its overall weight. He showed that the loss of weight occurs at an exponential rate, and the denser the material is, the quicker the residual forces will disappear. Here are some examples. Lead at a density of 11 will lose its latent force in 14 seconds. Aluminum at a density of 2.7 loses its latent forces in 28 seconds, and wood at a density of 0.5 loses its latent forces in 70 seconds. If this seems hard to understand, we could think of the fact that a denser, thicker sponge, such as the foam used in a mattress or a seat cushion, has much more spring to it than a lighter, thinner one, such as a tired old kitchen sponge. The more of the spring the material has, the quicker it can absorb and release energy. Kozyrev tested these effects on a number of different objects, and what he found was that the largest effects with maximum preservation times were observed on porous materials like brick or volcano tuff. So again, to summarize, what we found here is that the amount of energy that can be retained and the speed at which it's retained or absorbed is a function of the density of the material. And finally, the research of Kozyrev shows that there's a quantization of energy absorption and release. And we're going to spend a couple of minutes discussing this before we finish this section today. We discussed Kozyrev's experiments earlier, showing that when an object is disturbed in various ways, its changes in weight would slowly return to balance over time. However, there's one important factor that emerged in these experiments that does not easily fit into our convenient analogy of the sponge, and that is known as the effect of quantization. When something is quantized, that means that it does not move or count smoothly, but only in stepwise in certain specific intervals. Simply put, the weight of an object would not increase or decrease steadily in the latent force experiments, but rather in sudden bursts. This is certainly an anomalous property for matter to have, and as Kozyrev said, in the vibration experiments on a balance, the weight reduction occurs stepwise, beginning with a certain vibration power. As vibration frequency is further increased, the weight reduction at first remains the same and then again grows stepwise by the same value. So far, a realistic explanation of this effect has not been found. As a case in point, Kozyrev studied the effects of a 620-gram weight, which he was subject to vibrations measured in hertz or cycles per second. We remember that cooling an object contracts it, whereas heating an object will expand it. In order to give the experiments nice clean numbers, although he used a 620-gram weight, the results from the weight were converted to a higher and simpler value of 1 kilogram, and the numbers shown in the diagram below and in the paragraphs that follow are normalized to this 1 kilogram weight. If you look at the table before we continue, you can see though there was a quantization effect going on here, which we're going a step function, which we're going to discuss now. So as we can see from this chart, As the vibrations of the object rose to the threshold area of 16 to 23 hertz, the object would show a stable weight increase of 31 milligrams. At this level, Kozyrev would increase the vibrations between 16 and 23 cycles per second and detect no further weight gain. Then suddenly, as he increased the vibrations on the weight to 24 hertz, its overall weight increase would spontaneously double to 62 milligrams. As he increased the vibrations from 24 to 27 hertz, no change in weight was registered. Yet when the vibrations increased to 28 hertz, the net weight increase would again suddenly jump up by another 31 grams or milligrams to 93 milligrams. Each time that a new threshold would be reached, the initial gain of 31 milligrams would be added to the overall amount. As Kozyrev discovered, we succeeded in obtaining 5-fold and even 10-fold effects. Let us not forget that this effect quantization occurred in almost all of Kozyrev's experiments, whether the overall weight of the object in question was either increasing or decreasing. In order for something like that to be taking place, the basic 31 milligram interval that was measured with the 1 kilogram object must be a function of its combined volume, density, weight, and shape, similar to the tone that you hear when striking a bell of a given size, shape, and density. As Kozyrev rose the frequency of vibrations in the object, new intervals of weight increase were produced, but always in units of 31 milligrams. This effect quantization is actually a very important key to understanding the multidimensional nature of matter, illustrating that atoms and molecules maintain an onion-like structure of nested spherical waves. We're going to be talking a lot more about these topics in future episodes of this series, but for now, we're going to summarize the research results that we've talked about today. Torsion means the twisting or the act of being twisted. Microorganisms grow in a spiral structure. These expanding proportions also underlie the structure of plants, animals, and people, and these growth patterns following the spiraling form known as the phi spiral. All life forms must be drawing off of an unknown spiraling source of energy. This spiraling energy is the true nature and manifestation of time. The simple raising and lowering of a 10 kilogram weight would exert torsional pressure on a pendulum shielded in a glass under a vacuum, resulting in movement of the pendulum. Shaking an object up and down on a rubber band would increase the weight of the object, and the speed at which the object would return to its normal weight was faster for denser objects than for less dense objects. Weight increase or decrease did not occur steadily, but rather in sudden bursts. This effect quantization illustrates that atoms and molecules maintain a multi-dimensional onion-like structure of nested spherical waves. As always, thank you for watching. Please tell your friends about only. Now, the rest of that you don't need to listen to, but there's one other experiment that I did not discuss in that video, which is kind of anecdotal, but it's really kind of interesting. Kozyrev also used his modeling to determine that thought has the same effect as these torsion waves that float around. And so he set up his meter to again under the same conditions, under the vacuum and so forth. And what he would do, he would read a book and see what effect books would have, the information, and it would move the needle slightly. But his his favorite book was Faust, and so that was emotionally charged for him. And so when he would read Faust, then the needle would just pop, it would move so much faster than it would with something that he didn't have an emotional attachment to. So, when you think about your old line preachers and then the metaphysicians who talk about putting emotion into your affirmations and so forth, it confirms the fact that emotion, for whatever reason, seems to have a very big impact on increasing the effects in the torsion field. So just as the pyramid does. But so thinking inside the pyramid with emotion is going to be the most powerful way for you to manifest. So it's all proven in science. So that's pretty cool stuff. So are there any questions at this point from what you heard from Kozyrev? Yes, Allie.
Are torsion fields twisted ether? Are torsion fields the ether twisting?
I'm not sure if those are different. I'm only saying yes. What Kozyrev's research is showing is that torsion fields move in spirals, and they're continuously moving. So I think the answer is yes. The question is what is moving? Is it just a perturbation of this ether that exists? Does something really flow through it, or is it just an excitation of the ether? But whichever it is, the effect is this spiraling energy field that results. I don't know if that's as good an answer as I can give, because I'm not sure anybody knows the real answer to whether something's moving through the ether or if the ether is actually just being excited. My instinct is that it's the latter, that the ether is just excited in particular ways, and that our reality is probably nothing more than what's called an event horizon in the ether. So I don't know, but.
Is the ether chi? Is it life force? Is that what?
I think so. I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Chi, prana. Yeah.
How about you, Sherry? Oh, you're muted. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
I was just going to say that, oh boy, metaphysically, the quail, the bird, the quail,
Mhm.
has what they call a sacred spiral. That's just what you're talking about. It comes down into the crown chakra and goes through the body.
Mhm.
And it's a sign that you're connected. If you receive the image of a quail in a healing, or you draw animal cards and you get the quail, it's the sacred spiral. So it feels like it's the same thing. Because Charlie, when you were going like this up,
Yeah.
I was thinking, why, that's the sacred spiral that comes down.
There
Same
are
thing, probably. Yeah.
well, let me try to expand on that. My understanding at the moment is that torsion waves come from the sky or whatever, the universe, into the earth, and they're spiraling this way. Again, I'm going to use this right hand rule to understand the directions. If you hold a pen or pencil in your hand, your thumb is pointing up. The way your fingers are turning, that's the direction of the spin of the torsion field. So if it's coming down from the earth, it's going to be spinning this way. And that's I would call that at least in the context of our torus here, that's the centrifugal force. But that coming up from the Earth, there's also a torsion field, and that's centrifugal.
Right.
I got it back. There
Yep.
we go. And so there's, you've really got this going in here. One
Yeah,
going,
exactly.
out and one going in, and that's the male and female energies, as I understand it.
Right. And one more thing that just came up for me with that is that when I do a healing and I see it would be a torsion field, when it spins clockwise, something healing form energy is going into the body.
Right.
When it spins counterclockwise, it's done its job and it's moving out because it's spinning. It's the way the Sufis dance when
Right.
they do when they do the spinning, and they're in a completely different dimension. Anders and I have seen it before. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And they're spinning consciously, but sort of unconsciously. They're totally connected, heaven and earth connected.
Exactly.
And that also, as I'm pushing this idea a little bit forward, it accounts for the two going together, like as above, so below, in the six-pointed star that meets in the heart. And that's actually how I do certain meditations, where I bring the energy down through my body and then bring it up from the deepest point I can visualize in the earth up to the heart and then back down again. So there are these two different energies going. Exactly. It's really making sense. It like all comes together with what you're saying and with what I'm feeling from what I know in my experience. So cool.
Yeah, cool.
Really
So,
cool. Yeah.
All right. Any other comments on this one?
I better.
Oh, Dean is saying same in acupressure. Clockwise is stimulating, counterclockwise is sedating. Okay, cool. So the next one is going to be, again, Anatoly Akimov. And I when I did this video, I wasn't quite, you're going to hear about this, but I'll give you a little longer version of the tale before we start. I had read about this particular article in David Wilcock's books online. I wanted a copy. And so I went to the local librarian, research librarian, checked, and you'll hear this, Library of Congress had it, and some other source that she didn't necessarily name. And she said, we'll have it in a few days. Well, a week passes. I'm scheduled to present this, the geometry, the pyramid out in California, Conscious Life Expo. So I need this thing at some point. 1 week passes, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And every week I'd call up and nothing, she'd say, I haven't heard anything. And sure enough, they came back finally after like 8 weeks and said, oh, now we've lost it. Sounds like some of the shenanigans that's going on these days. Like, oh, we couldn't find that film from Kenosha until Monday, that kind of stuff. So I had to go to London to get this because apparently they had it. They just decided that this was too important, I guess, to let out. So we had to violate interlibrary loan, and the librarian was nice enough to go to London and get it, which is not normally something they would do. But I got it in about 3 days from London. So anyway, with that said, that's why this is important stuff, because this is the key to so much, to know that the importance of having phi in this geometry. That's what this article demonstrates, and why you're going to see phi in the major pyramid geometries, like this one and the Giza. So, okay. let me see if I can, shouldn't have probably done it this way. Let's see. PVC Pyramids, they can see us at onlypvcpyramids.com and also follow us on YouTube at onlypvc. Give me a second here. Here we go. And this is Charlie Zees with Only PVC Pyramids. This video today is part of our continuing series on the fundamentals of pyramid science. This is part 7 of that series, and today's video is entitled The Torsion Field Research of Anatoly Akimov. Now, this series we've had to put on hold for several weeks due to 2 factors. We were recently out at the Conscious Life Expo delivering a talk, and we've done a subsequent video on the sacred geometry of Russian pyramids. And Dr. Akimov's research is certainly important to constructing that theory and argument. But the second part to our concern was the fact that the article that we're going to be discussing today took a lot longer to get through interlibrary loan. In fact, we ended up having to go out of the country after the Library of Congress told us that they had it in their possession, and then subsequently said that they couldn't find it. So we've got the article from Europe, just got it a few days ago, and that's the reason for the delay. But let's get started, and we'll see what Dr. Akimov has to say about the sacred geometry of cones and pyramids and their effect on their ability to act as passive torsion generators. To review our 6 core elements of pyramid science, we previously discussed the existence of the ether and the existence of torsion waves. And in our last episode, we discussed the research of Dan A. Davidson and his book, Shape Power. So this is a continuation of that discussion about the ability of objects, including pyramids, to act as passive torsion generators. Now, these next 2 pages are coming actually from the talk that I gave several weeks ago and the subsequent video on the sacred geometry of Russian pyramids. Anatoly Akimov and his team conducted research into passive torsion generators and published their results in 1991. And that's the article we're going to be discussing here in a few minutes. They were particularly interested in studying the effects that cones of different sizes had on different varying processes. And in this case, they looked at the effects of torsion fields on the crystallization of micellar structures. And we'll talk about what that means here in a few minutes. And in the context of this article, a cone can be considered to be a pyramid with an infinite number of sides. Now, as I discussed in this video and in the talk out in California, I had ordered this article that we're going to be discussing from Interlibrary Loan, and was told that it was available both from the Library of Congress and from another source as long ago as 2 months ago. But as I continued to wait for the article, I subsequently was told that now suddenly neither entity could find this article. And so I ended up having to go to Europe to get a copy of this article that I'm going to be presenting to you today. And because of that, and the potential interest in this article, I'm going to go ahead and post that on my website. There'll be a link to this article in the comments section at the bottom of this video. So to review the results of this article, or a summary of this article that was published in David Wilcock's Divine Cosmos, he stated that from this research, it was determined that the best passive torsion generators were formed by cones that were shaped into the phi ratio. And that what this tells us is the torsion waves are indeed phi spirals, since a cone that duplicates this pattern will harness the waves most strongly. And we do get essentially those, when we read the actual results, we essentially see the same answers that David summarized in his Divine Cosmos book. But I wanted to go through line by line with you the relevant pieces of this. And again, we're not going to go through all of it. We're only going to talk about the highlighted sections because that's what's relevant today. But again, that article is up and available for review on my website. So to begin with, a study of the effects of physical fields on biological and microbiological objects is of great practical and theoretical interest. The effect of electromagnetic fields on these objects has been investigated most fully. With the formation of the concept of macroscopic spinor fields, and here they mean torsion fields, the possibility arose of using torsion radiations as a fundamentally new physical method of action. And in the research, it is shown that the occurrence of an S field, and let me explain, that means a spin field, a spin portion of the torsion field, is related to quantization of a physical vacuum. And again, here physical vacuum means the ether. So to translate English into better English for us, it is shown that the occurrence of a spin torsion field is related to quantization of the ether, and therefore points to the multidimensional aspects of the ether in the creative process. Now, the torsion state of the ether can be changed by an external disturbance, and it can be kept in this state steadily. Thus, the effect can be recorded similarly to a standing wave of a certain spatial frequency structure. On the basis of this, the source of a static torsion field does not radiate, but controls the phase state of the physical vacuum or ether. Now, back to the underlying text here. The plane geometry of the ether, the physical vacuum, is distorted by means of macro bodies or objects of a certain size and shape, and thus torsion fields of considerable strength can be created. And if these bodies have geometric dimensions, really key, with fulfillment of the golden section, then they can play the role of concentrators of the torsion field. Once again, what we're saying here, if the geometric dimensions fulfill the phi ratio or the phi spiral, here they're calling it the golden section, they can play the role of concentrators of the torsion field. Now, this article presents preliminary results obtained in a study of the effects of a static torsion field on crystallization of micellar structures of biological systems and high-density lipoproteins of human blood plasma. Now, we're going to put this up for the non-scientists and even for the scientists in the group. Micellar structure refers to micelles, and micelles are lipid molecules that arrange themselves in a spherical form in an aqueous solution. The formation of a micelle is a response to the amphipathic nature of fatty acids, meaning that they contain both hydrophilic regions and hydrophobic regions as well. Now, the selection of biological systems for studying the effects of a static torsion field on biological structures is related to the fact that micellar formations as ordered biological systems can easily change structure under the effect of external physical fields, and therefore the effect of the torsion field can be recorded by means of the change in the phase structure of micellarity. So to continue on with the results, the experimental conditions used for the experiment as the source of the static torsion field were used both special generators and hollow physical bodies, and here they're talking about cones, of a certain configuration whose geometric dimension obeys the golden section. Again, we're not told exactly what that means here, but I'm going to speculate that given the fact that the pyramids built by Dr. Golod were being built contemporaneous with the publishing of this data, that these dimensions of the golden section were most likely those same dimensions that were used by Dr. Golod in the construction of his pyramids. But cones, and to continue on, of various materials were also used in the work. So this research not only looked at the importance of the phi relationship, but also the difference of materials and sizes of cones used in the research. A quartz plate with the appropriate biological fluid applied on it was placed in the static torsion field, and the control was an analogous plate with the same biological fluid placed in the hollow region of a body made of the same material, but whose geometric dimensions did not obey the golden section. I just want to stop and go over what we just heard, because I think there's some key things there. You heard that they put this bile and the other liquid matter on a quartz plate. So that's a crystal. And just as we know that the pyramid is what, concentrates this field and amplifies it, a quartz plate being a crystal, it itself is going to be a further amplification of that effect, during the experiment. So it kind of shows you that they knew that putting crystals, inside this torsion field would amplify the effects. So anyway, we'll get back to it.
Just one point here.
Yeah.
So thus Lisa's amplification plate, which
Yes.
is quartz sand,
Mhm.
also, and her capstones and your
Yep,
caduceus coil
right.
amplify everything. Yeah.
that's right. That's exactly
Yeah.
it. That's-
Okay, cool. Really cool.
Okay.
And in the experiments, Dr. Akimov used bile from human liver of a gallstone patient and high-density lipoproteins isolated from human blood serum by the precipitation method. Now, on the next slide, we're going to start to see pictures of the results. Figure 1 shows photomicrographs of the solid bile preparation obtained without the effects of the spinner field, figure 1A, and in a static torsion field, figure 1B. It is seen that the solid bile preparation has a fractal structure characteristic for crystals of micellar structures. Furthermore, it is seen that the static torsion field affects the fractal dimension of the crystals. More details of the large-scale fractal structure appear in the crystals of the preparation of the torsion field sample in comparison with the control specimen. And these experiments had a stable reproducibility. And going down to the next paragraph, the static torsion field affects both the fractal character of the structure of HDLs when HDLs were analyzed and the additional anisotropic inclusions. It changes their numbers and size. And moving further down, when crystallization of such micelles occurs in a static torsion field, it, meaning the field acting through the spin state on the micelles themselves, will affect their diffusion and the size and shape of the fractals. And finally, it's necessary to point out the potential possibility of the effect of static spinner or torsion fields and torsion radiations on various media and objects. Thus, the erythrocyte sedimentation rate increases under the effect of a static torsion field. And finally, and this is important, I think, for future consideration and discussion, The influence of torsion effects on the activity of viruses and bacteria is presently being studied. And the reason why I think that's important, some of the research into chronic disease that's been done by researchers such as Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt point to the fact that 98% of the DNA in our bodies is really not our own, but it's the DNA of microorganisms. And it would be fascinating to see additional research done, either that research done in Russia subsequently, or research that we may be able to do in the future in the United States on the impacts of these pyramid fields on bacteria and other microorganisms. Once again, what this is showing us in conclusion is that torsion fields that are generated by cones and by extension pyramids that use the phi ratio or the golden section had the most important impact on the torsion fields, as did specific materials that were used in the constructions of these cones. So once again, the research of Dr. Akimov, and there's much more that we want to talk about with his research as we are able to find and obtain his additional research and perhaps get it translated from Russian into English. You're going to find that one of the footnotes here is an article from Dr. Akimov that's in Russian. We're going to try to get a copy of that and get it translated so that we can talk about that in future talks. But again, to summarize Dr. Akimov's work, we see that his research demonstrates that phi golden section ratios, and we believe that to be phi spirals, are very important in affecting this micellar crystallization that was seen when studying high-density lipoproteins and human bile. So I hope this was helpful, and as always, tell your friends.
Okay, so that's the second one. There's a lot of stuff that probably didn't make a whole lot of sense. I'll try to summarize some of this. Micelles are essentially, these objects, these micellar structures would grow with much greater definition. They grow kind of like crystals would not grow naturally, and they grew much more rapidly and larger in the presence of the torsion fields produced by these cones that he was with the 5 spiral dimensions. So just one of the seminal pieces that proves that form such as the pyramid with that incorporate phi are going to have these impacts on the torsion field and therefore on its environment. So it's not a surprise at all as a result that this pyramid has this geometry. The Giza pyramid has phi in its geometry and so forth, and just proves that this knowledge has been around. There wouldn't be a reason to build pyramids like that unless there was a reason for doing so. And we're obviously finding research that proves that these form effects or shape effects are real. So anyway, that's the research from Akimov. So if there, I don't know, any other questions? Comments? I guess everybody's.
I put one in the chat.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of how the torsion field, if I remember correctly, it does help to clear toxins, right, from the body?
Yes.
Okay. So I was wondering how that would work, like it would be so cool to have experiments on some of the latest things that have come up with this AI, and the jabs and all that.
That's right. Well, I mean, talking about the jab, Lisa and I did an interview with Nick Alviar 2 days ago, and this came up in conversation. But when you look at the health research, one of the things that the pyramid does is it slows the rate of growth of pyramid water, I should say. When you put the encephalomyocarditis virus into a medium made with structure or pyramid water, it slows the growth of that EMC virus. And so that's certainly a harmful, effect for humans. And myocarditis is a side effect that's showing up, unfortunately, very consistently from the jab. So I can't put two and two together completely at this point, but it certainly points in the direction. And I would say the same thing is true to digress about Dietrich Klinghart's work in general. He's proven that EMFs are extremely harmful and cause a lot of chronic disease. And he's shown that elimination of EMFs from your environment will help people with certain chronic diseases, including autism and so forth. We've also shown, at least in a rudimentary way, through the Lecker antenna and through dowsing, that electromagnetic pollution seems to be eliminated or significantly reduced in the presence of the pyramid energy field. So there's a lot of stuff that tends to take us in that direction. But yeah, we need more research, I guess, to get more definitive answers to that.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, that's
Thank you so much, Charlie. It was really
sure.
illuminating. I was trying to quickly search internet to see if Dr. Akimov is still, working in the science and doing his research. I couldn't find really. Well, anyway, in any case, if you need someone to translate those articles, I can help.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. I never, well, that's wonderful to know. I never followed up on those articles because I really didn't have anybody to translate them. So, if we can find them, it would be interesting to do that. Do you have a science background?
Yes, I'm biologist, certified PhD in biology, but
Okay.
the only thing is many of those, especially older articles, are not available through the PubMed or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to order them through library exchange, I guess. I don't know.
Well, that's right. And might be from my own experience, it might be easier to get stuff from Russia than it is from our own Library of Congress. So
right. Actually, it's a good idea. I can ask my friends from Russia to help with that.
Yeah. Well, I've always been looking, to do that. And at the time I did it, I was excited, but I just I was hoping also we had Lisa and I had a conversation with Dr. Golod. I think it was December 31st last year. And I was hoping to develop a relationship with him and so forth. And that never really, he didn't seem particularly forthcoming and wanting to, I mean, he was cordial, but, we were using a translator during the phone call and, but I followed through and asked him for research papers and things and never heard back. So, so that's why it kind of, and then, the world moves on. But yeah, if you're willing to do that, maybe we can try to get some more of this research. And the thing that I wouldn't know how to do is kind of like how to find them, because I don't, if they're not translated, I wouldn't know what articles to look for, if you know what I mean. I don't know. So maybe we can have a chat on that.
Yes,
And
certainly.
figure out how to go about doing that. Cool.
Well, I'm glad to be of use.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Research.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So
Yeah.
any other comments or questions? If not,
Thank you, Charlie.
I have a
all
comment.
right. And now next week, we are taking the week off. So there will
Right.
be no midweek Love Blast meditation and no session on Saturday because of Thanksgiving here in the States. So we'll get back in touch with agendas for the other things as well. I will say, Lisa and I had a really nice time with Nick Alvear. If those of you who know of him, he has a YouTube or channel, excuse me, not YouTube, excuse me, a website, goodlion.tv. And that video is on there. I think Lisa is reposting that also on the foundation website. I didn't check to see if she got that done, but I know she's not feeling well, so it may not have happened yet. So anyway, that was good stuff. And Nick's going to be back up in about 2 weeks, and I think he's wants us to, he may not know what he's in for, but he's offered me as much time as I want to talk about sacred geometry research the next time. So
Eat it.
I'm gonna just gather up all the stuff that I've got
No, swallow it.
and go for it.
The full one.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of new stuff. I've mentioned some of it, but it'll give me a chance to sort of start to put some meat behind the model that I'm hoping to develop and show you where it's going. So anyway, okay, thank you so much, and have a great weekend and a great Thanksgiving. We'll look forward to getting back together in a few weeks.
Thank you so much.
All right.
You too.
Bye.
Great.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Happy Thanksgiving.